The oxygen tank sat hidden behind the amplifier stack, tubes snaking across the stage floor like lifelines. Lemmy Kilmister was dying, and everyone in the Berlin venue could see it. What they couldn't see was that he'd already made his choice. He would rather die on stage than disappoint a single fan. It was December 11th, 2015, at the Huxley's Neue Welt in Berlin, Germany. What nobody in that packed venue knew was that they were about to witness the final performance of one of rock's greatest warriors. Lemmy had been battling multiple health issues for months, but he'd refused to cancel the European tour. The fans bought tickets, he'd told his worried bandmates. I'm not letting them down. The venue held about 2,000 people, and every single spot was packed. Motorhead fans had traveled from across Europe for this show, some driving for days just to see their hero one more time. The atmosphere was electric with anticipation, but backstage, the mood was somber and terrified. Dr. Susan Brennan, the tour physician, had been arguing with Lemmy for 3 hours. His blood oxygen levels were dangerously low, his heart was struggling, and his diabetes was completely out of control. He could barely walk from his dressing room to the stage entrance without gasping for breath. "Lemmy, you cannot go out there tonight," Dr. Brennan had said, her voice firm but pleading. "Your body is shutting down. If you perform tonight, you might not make it off that stage alive." Lemmy had looked at her with those dark eyes that had seen 5 decades of rock and roll chaos. His voice, already weakened, was barely above a whisper. "Doc, if I'm going to die, I'm going to die doing what I love. Those kids out there paid good money to see Motorhead. They're getting Motorhead." But what happened next shocked everyone backstage. Phil Campbell, Motorhead's guitarist since 1984, had walked into the dressing room just as Dr. Brennan was making one final plea. Phil had seen Lemmy through everything, the good times and the disasters, the triumphs and the near-death experiences. But he'd never seen his friend look this frail. "Maybe we should postpone, Lem," Phil had suggested gently. "Tell them you've got the flu or something. Nobody would blame you." Lemmy had slowly turned his head toward Phil. The movement seemed to take enormous effort. "Phil," he said, his voice raspy but still carrying that familiar authority. "How long have we been doing this together?" 31 years, mate. 31 years. And in all that time, have we ever canceled a show because I was feeling poorly?" Phil had to think about it. There was the time in 1987 when Lemmy had food poisoning so bad he was vomiting between songs. He'd finished the show. There was 1992 when he'd broken 2 ribs in a motorcycle accident earlier that day. He'd performed sitting on a stool. In 2001, when he'd had that heart scare in Chicago, he'd been back on stage 3 days later against doctor's orders. "No," Phil admitted. "We haven't." "Then we're not starting now," Lemmy had said with finality. Mickey D., the drummer who joined the band in 1992, had been pacing the small dressing room like a caged animal. He'd watched Lemmy's health decline over the past year, had seen the legend struggle with simple tasks that used to be effortless. Walking upstairs left Lemmy winded. Lifting his bass guitar required visible effort. "What if something happens out there?" Mickey had asked. "What if you collapse?" Lemmy had managed a small smile, the first one anyone had seen from him all day. "Then you keep playing. Give them the best fucking show they've ever seen, and make sure they remember Motorhead went out loud." The crowd had no idea what was happening behind the scenes. At 9:15 p.m., the lights dimmed and the familiar drone of feedback began building. The crowd erupted, 2,000 voices screaming for their heroes. But when the stage lights came up, something was clearly different. Lemmy appeared from stage left, but his usual confident swagger was gone. He moved slowly, carefully, like a man walking on ice. His signature black leather outfit hung loose on his frame. He'd lost nearly 30 pounds in the past 6 months. His long hair, usually wild and flowing, was thinner, grayer. The iconic moles on his face were more pronounced against his pale skin. But he was there. The legend was on stage, gripping his Rickenbacker bass like it was the only thing keeping him upright. The opening chords of Bomber rang out, and for a moment, it seemed like everything might be okay. Lemmy's bass sound was still massive, still earth-shaking. The crowd was losing their minds, singing along to every word. This was what they'd come for, pure, unfiltered Motorhead. But by the third song, Stay Clean, it was obvious that something was wrong. Lemmy was struggling to breathe between lyrics. His voice, never pretty but always powerful, was coming in gasps. He'd take a line, then leaned heavily on his mic stand while Phil and Mickey carried the musical weight. Several people in the front rows looked concerned. This wasn't the Lemmy they knew. Marcus Weber, a 34-year-old mechanic from Munich, had been a Motorhead fan since he was 12 years old. He'd seen them live 17 times, had traveled to England just to visit Lemmy's apartment above the Rainbow Bar. He was standing in the front row, and he could see that his hero was in trouble. Something's not right. Marcus turned and told his girlfriend, Anna. Look at him. He can barely stand. Anna nodded, worry etched on her face. Around them, other longtime fans were having the same realization. This wasn't a typical Motorhead show. This felt like something else entirely. Halfway through Ace of Spades, the song that had defined Lemmy's career, the impossible happened. Lemmy collapsed. One moment he was standing at his microphone, growling out the lyrics that had become anthems for outcasts and rebels worldwide. The next moment, his knees buckled and he went down hard, his bass guitar clattering across the stage floor. The music stopped instantly. Phil and Mickey rushed to his side, while roadies appeared from everywhere. The crowd went silent, 2,000 people holding their collective breath, watching their hero down on his knees, gasping for air that wouldn't come. Dr. Brennan appeared from the wings with her medical bag, but before she could reach him, Lemmy had struggled back to his feet. His face was ashen, sweat pouring down despite the cool December air, but he was standing. He picked up his bass, adjusted the strap, and walked back to his microphone. "Sorry about that, folks," he said, his voice barely carrying over the sound system. "Where were we?" The crowd erupted, not with excitement, but with something deeper, love, respect, and heartbreak all mixed together. They understood what they were witnessing. This wasn't just a concert anymore. This was a man's final stand. But what Lemmy said next broke everyone's hearts. He looked out at the sea of faces, many of them now openly crying, and managed that crooked smile that had charmed and terrified audiences for 40 years. "I know what you're thinking," he said, leaning heavily on the mic stand for support. "Old bastard should retire, right? Go sit in a rocking chair somewhere. Maybe take up crossword puzzles." A few people in the crowd laughed, but it was nervous laughter, uncertain laughter. "But here's the thing," Lemmy continued, his voice getting a little stronger. "I've been thinking about that. About what retirement would look like for someone like me. You know what I figured out?" He paused, looking across the crowd like he was memorizing each face. "This is my retirement. This stage, this bass, you beautiful bastards out there singing along to these stupid songs. This is all I've ever wanted to do, and this is all I'll ever want to do until the day I die." The emotional weight of those words hit the crowd like a physical force. Marcus Weber, the mechanic from Munich, found tears streaming down his face. Around him, hardened metalheads were openly sobbing. "So if it's all right with you lot," Lemmy said, straightening up as much as his failing body would allow, "I'd like to finish this show, because I promised you Motorhead, and by God, you're getting Motorhead." The next hour became the most emotionally powerful performance in rock history. Lemmy played through pain that would have hospitalized most people. Between songs, he would lean against his amp stack, the hidden oxygen tank helping him catch his breath. Phil and Mickey, understanding the gravity of the moment, played with an intensity and precision that elevated every song. The crowd sang louder than they ever had before, as if they could give Lemmy their collective strength. During Overkill, the entire venue became a single voice, carrying the melody when Lemmy's voice faltered. It was communion through music, a shared understanding that they were all part of something that would never happen again. During the game, Lemmy stumbled again, catching himself on Phil's amp. This time, instead of stopping, he motioned for the crowd to sing his parts. 2,000 voices picked up the lyrics without missing a beat, turning the song into a massive sing-along while Lemmy focused just on playing bass. Sarah Mitchell, a 19-year-old student from London, later wrote about that moment. "It wasn't that Lemmy couldn't sing anymore. It was that he was trusting us with his songs, sharing them in a way that made us all part of the band. We weren't just watching Motorhead. We were Motorhead." Then came the moment that shattered everyone present. As they reached the end of the planned set, Lemmy walked to the front of the stage. His breathing was labored, his face was gray with exhaustion, but his eyes were bright. He looked out at the crowd with something approaching wonder. "You know," he said into the microphone, "I've played thousands of shows in my life. Some good, some shit, most somewhere in between. But this one's special. He paused, gripping the mic stand for support. I want you to know that every single one of you made this worth it. The traveling, the hangovers, the shitty hotel rooms, the record company idiots, all of it. Nights like this make it all worth it. The crowd was completely silent now, hanging on every word. I don't know if I'll see you again, Lemmy continued, and now his voice was breaking with emotion. My body's telling me things I don't want to hear. But I want you to remember something. Rock and roll doesn't die when the musicians die. It lives on in you, in the kids you'll bring to their first shows, in the music you'll make, in the noise you'll make. Tears were streaming down faces throughout the venue. This wasn't just a rock concert anymore. This was a farewell. So when you leave here tonight, Lemmy said, you take a piece of Motorhead with you, and you keep it loud. You keep it fast. You keep it dirty. And you never, ever let the bastards grind you down. The final song was Born to Raise Hell. But it wasn't really performed by Motorhead alone. It was performed by 2,000 people who understood they were witnessing the end of an era. Every person in that venue sang every word, their voices mixing with Lemmy's failing rasp to create something transcendent. When the final chord rang out, Lemmy stood at the front of the stage for a long moment. He looked exhausted beyond measure, but also peaceful. He'd done what he'd set out to do. He'd given everything he had left to give. He raised one trembling hand to the crowd, that familiar salute he'd given thousands of times before. But this time it felt different. This time it felt like goodbye. Then Lemmy Kilmister walked off the stage for the last time. 27 days later, on December 28, 2015, Lemmy died in his apartment above the Rainbow Bar and Grill. The cause of death was complications from diabetes, heart failure, and prostate cancer, the same conditions that had been killing him on stage in Berlin. Dr. Brennan later revealed that Lemmy's condition that night had been so critical that she'd expected him to collapse and die during the performance. He knew he was dying, she said in an interview years later. He'd known for months. But he also knew that if he was going to go, he wanted to go out on his own terms, doing what he loved, in front of people who loved him back. The fans who were there that night in Berlin became unofficial guardians of the story. Videos were posted online, but they didn't capture the emotional weight of the experience. You had to be there to understand what had happened. Marcus Weber, the mechanic from Munich, started a tradition. Every December 11th, he returns to Berlin and stands outside the venue, now closed and converted to condos. He brings a small speaker and plays Born to Raise Hell exactly at the time it was performed that night. Other fans have joined him over the years. They call it Lemmy's Last Stand. Phil Campbell and Mickey D later said that night changed everything for them. We knew it was special while it was happening, Phil recalled. You could feel it in the room. It wasn't just a show, it was Lemmy saying goodbye, and all of us saying goodbye back. Mickey was more direct. He died the way he lived, loud, proud, and on his own terms. He could have died in a hospital bed, hooked up to machines. Instead, he died as Lemmy fucking Kilmister, rock and roll legend. The set list from that final show was later auctioned for charity, raising over $50,000 for cancer research. But the real legacy of that night isn't monetary. It's the example of a man who refused to let death defeat him, who chose to spend his final days doing what he loved, surrounded by people who loved him. Today, there's a plaque outside the former Huxley's Newey Welt venue. It reads, in both German and English, here on December 11th, 2015, Lemmy Kilmister of Motorhead performed his final concert, proving that rock and roll never dies. It just changes form. The truth is, everyone in that room that night became part of rock history. They witnessed something that will never be repeated, a legend choosing to burn out rather than fade away, giving everything he had left to the music and the fans who made his life meaningful. Sarah Mitchell, the student from London, summed it up best in her journal entry that night. I thought I was going to see a rock show. Instead, I watched a warrior die the way he lived, standing up, fighting, and surrounded by people who understood what he represented. I'll carry that with me forever. Sometimes the greatest performances aren't about technical perfection or staging or production values. Sometimes they're about a human being refusing to surrender, choosing love over fear, and showing the world what it means to truly live and die for your art. Lemmy's final performance wasn't just the end of Motorhead. It was a masterclass in courage, a final lesson from the loudest teacher in rock and roll. When life tries to turn down your volume, you play even louder.